Good afternoon. I'm Michael Sanders, and this broadcast is coming to you from the auditorium at Canterbury Woods in Pacific Grove. I'd like to share with you today one of the more remarkable works from the endless library of compositions by Johann Sebastian Bach. This is one of the 6 cello suites. Now, it's not remarkable that Bach wrote suites of dances. Everybody, it seems, in the Baroque era did that. But what he did, and for which there are hardly any other comparable composers, he wrote 6 suites for unaccompanied cello. That is, cello without any kind of accompanying instrument. The melody line of the cello was expected to provide also all the harmonic implications and all the rhythmic and textural elements to make an entire piece of music. We know really very little about these pieces. We know that they were written when Bach was a Kapellmeister in the town of Köthen, not a church job, but we don't know for whom he wrote the pieces. As far as we know, there was no famous or highly gifted cellist in Köthen at that time. Bach himself certainly was not a cellist as far as we know. We don't know who heard the music. One possibility is that they were written simply for the cellist's own joy and pleasure and instruction. But my feeling is probably Bach wanted the pieces to be heard by somebody else. In any case, it wouldn't have been more than a handful of very aristocratic and highly educated people. And we don't know how they were heard. One possibility is that just individual movements from the suites were played, a dance here, a dance there. Or perhaps the entire set of 6 movements was heard at one time. In modern days, it's become almost traditional that people perform the entire set of 6 suites. It takes about 2.5 hours. And audiences come to hear those programs with almost like a spiritual or even religious experience. A couple of years ago, the cellist Yo-Yo Ma played all 6 of these suites in Hollywood Bowl. As I said, it took about 2.5 hours. There he was on the stage, all by himself, with an audience of more than 17,000 people. Well, I'm going to play them in a way that I am sure Bach never imagined that they would be done. I'd like to play the 3rd suite, the suite in C major. And I'd like to preface each of the movements of that suite with a piece from the popular music repertory, a song, and in fact, a song about dancing. Now, if you protest quite rightly that Bach never heard his cello suites done this way, well, he never heard them played for an audience of 17,000 people either, or ever heard them over YouTube or Zoom. So anyway, see what you think. I will play the Bach suite prefaced by a piece from popular repertory. And the first piece I'd like to play is a song that is sung and danced by Fred Astaire. It comes originally from a musical that died in London after 3 weeks. And It seems like Fred Astaire may have been one of the few people to see it before it died. It had Jerome Kern was the composer, and Oscar Hammerstein was the librettist, so you would expect it to be wonderful. And the music really was wonderful, but the words were not very special. Years later, when another of Jerome Kern's stage plays was made into a Hollywood musical, Fred Astaire remembered this song and asked if it could be included in the musical that was called now Roberta. So they brought in a wonderful, wonderful lyricist, one of my very favorite ones, Dorothy Fields. And she wrote a new set of words, keeping only the refrain. The refrain is, "I won't dance." And changing the character of the song a little bit, now the reason Fred Astaire is not dancing is not because he's shy, but because the loveliness of his girlfriend inflames him so that he doesn't feel fully under control of himself. So this has some of my favorite words and my very favorite rhyme that I know of by Dorothy Fields. Here are some of the words. He says, "When you dance, you're charming and you're gentle, especially when you do the continental. But this feeling isn't purely mental, for heaven rest us, I'm not asbestos." So here is the song, "I Won't Dance," by Dorothy Fields, music, and Jerome Kern's, I'll say that the other way around, Dorothy Fields' words, Jerome Kern's music, "I Won't Dance," from Roberta. Thank you. Now you've no doubt noticed that I am not playing on the cello, so you may wonder what exactly I intend to do to play these the movements of the third cello suite. Well, this music in recent years has become so well loved by instrumentalists who play so many different instruments that it has been frequently transcribed either in whole or in part. I have a partial list, probably incomplete, of some of the instruments for which these suites have been transcribed. Here are some of them. Violin, viola, double bass, viola da gamba, mandolin, piano, of course, marimba, classical guitar, recorder, flute, electric bass, horn, saxophone, clarinet, bassoon, trumpet, trombone, euphonium, tuba, ukulele, and charango. This last instrument, I am told, is a Peruvian plucked instrument, something like a lute. I know of at least 3 complete transcriptions of this suite, and there probably are more, certainly of individual movements. The transcription I'm going to play was made by Joachim Raff at the end of the 19th century. Raff was a very fertile, energetic, and skilled composer. He was very popular by the end of his life, and was sometimes compared to the very greatest German composers, Wagner and Brahms. Well, some people thought that he was the equal of Wagner and Brahms, and I believe that Mr. Raff thought that. In any case, when he died, he left none of his money to his children. All he left was the royalties to his compositions, which he expected would keep them well off forever. However, when he died, unfortunately, his reputation sank like a stone, and his family, in fact, had years of real hardship after that. Nevertheless, these are wonderful transcriptions, I think. They sound to me like what Bach would have written if he had decided to write them for keyboard. The first movement of this suite, and as is true of all the suites, is a prelude, not a dance. So I thought it would make sense to have preceded it by I Won't Dance. This movement doesn't dance. It's more like an improvisation. It's the prelude to the Suite in C major, number 3, by Bach. Now something quite different. There was a country western band called the Golden West Cowboys. And two of the band members, Pee Wee King and Red Stewart, were driving the equipment truck to a gig near Nashville when they heard on the radio a new song called the Kentucky Waltz, written by a man named Bill Monroe. Stewart began to wonder, why don't we have a song like that? Why don't we have a waltz? So the band actually had something that they called the No Name Waltz. That was one of their instrumental numbers. And as the people were riding along in the truck, they began creating words for this song and writing them on a matchbox. Well, this became the Tennessee Waltz. This, of course, was a country western band, so the song is about heartbreak and tragedy. And the singer of the song is dancing with his sweetheart to the tune of the Tennessee Waltz. And along comes his very best friend, and he waltzes his sweetheart away. So I understand at one time this was the all-time best-selling song in Japan. I don't know why. But it's a nice tune, and this is a nice arrangement by Philip Keverin of the Tennessee Waltz. Thank you. Now, the first of the dance movements proper in this suite is an allemande. And I suppose I should say a word or two about the structure of at least a German Baroque dance suite. By the generation before Bach, that had been pretty much settled in a fixed order. 4 dances, slow, fast, slow, fast. They were the allemande, the courante or the corrente, the sarabande, and the gigue. Now, between the last 2 dances, any number of additional dances could be inserted. In these Bach cello suites, there always were 2 dances, and they were always 2 versions of the same kind of dance. So that was the overall structure. And this first dance, this allemande, like all of the dances, received a good deal of attention from musical theorists of Bach's time. They had very specific ideas of how the dances should be written, how they should go, how they should be danced. And in the case of the Allemande, I can give you two experts on it. One was Johann Gottfried Walther, and he said the Allemande must be composed and likewise danced in a grave and ceremonious manner. And the other great theorist of Bach's time said, Johann Mattheson, described Allemande as a serious and well-composed harmoniousness in arpeggiated style, expressing satisfaction or amusement and delighting in order and calm. Well, the different Allemandes in the different suites are quite different from each other, but this one is especially intricate and elaborate. It's almost like needlework or embroidery. So here is the Allemande C major suite number 3 of Bach. Now here's another song about dancing, one of the very best. It comes from The King and I, and it's the song that Anna sings to the king. The king asks her, "What is this about Western romance?" She begins to tell him, and then she remembers meeting her husband and falling in love with him at first sight at a dance. And so the king insists on being taught then how to do this dancing. And she, Anna, begins to show him the polka. And as this wonderful number expands, the dancing gets more and more vigorous and fills the entire stage. So here is Rodgers and Hammerstein's "Shall We Dance" from The King and I. Thank you. Now, as I mentioned, when Bach wrote these pieces, they were in the hands of only a few, presumably cellists or people interested in the art of composing for a single instrument. They were published, but cellists thought of them as exceptionally difficult exercises. The focus was on their technical usefulness rather than on their musical value. And this remained the case, even though they were published eventually, several times over, until a young boy named Pablo Casals, a man from Catalonia, discovered a copy of this music in a used bookstore in Madrid. He was 13 at the time, and he spent the next 10 years of his life working and learning these pieces. After 10 years, he began to play them in public, but he refused to allow anyone to record them until he was 60 years old, almost another half a century after he began learning them. it definitely is the case that Casals made it essential for every cellist who intends to present himself as a serious solo musician to play these pieces, and I suppose to record them. There are more than 150 recordings that I know of these pieces. Anyway, the next movement in this order of the suite is a courante. That's the French name, or corrente. That's the Italian name. They come from the same root word, and they mean something like running dance, either one. The courante, the French version, is described by Johann Mattheson as cheerfully characterized by the passion or mood of sweet expectation. For there is something heartfelt, something longing and also gratifying in this melody. Clearly, music on which hopes are built. Now, the Italian version of this same dance is lighter and a little bit faster than the French version, but both of them are running dances. And here is the courante from the C major cello suite of Bach. Thank you. Now, it's probably no surprise that in a program that has a number of songs about dancing, we should encounter the name of Fred Astaire more than once. In fact, we'll hear songs that he's associated with 3 times in the course of this program. The next work comes from the movie musical Easter Parade, and it occurs 3 times in the course of the musical. It's almost the musical spine of the movie. First of all, it's danced by Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and Fred sings it in part. And then about halfway through the movie, Judy Garland is sitting at a piano and sings it to Fred Astaire. And then close to the end of the musical, Ann Miller, I think I said Ginger Rogers, but I meant Ann Miller, dances this one time again with Fred Astaire. The song is "It Only Happens When I Dance With You." And it's, as all the songs are in Easter Parade, it's by Irving Berlin. Thank you. Now I'd like to play the Sarabande from this suite. For Bach, at least, the Sarabande was almost always the spiritual center of the suite, the most deeply felt, the most expressive, the most harmonically intense and revealing. The Sarabande is an old dance, and 100 years later, earlier than Bach, the Jesuit priest Juan de Mariana thought it was an indecent dance. He described it in his treatise against public amusements as, quote, a dance and song so loose in its words and so ugly in its motions that it is enough to excite bad emotions in even very decent people. You will be glad to learn, or perhaps you will be disappointed to learn, that by Bach's time it had become a much more sober and decorous dance. It plays an important role in all of his suites, but it also is the typical rhythm of some of his most profound works. The theme of the Goldberg Variations, for example, or the final choruses to both of Bach's great passions, the St. Matthew and the St. John. The cello is an instrument that is tuned with its lowest string, C, and the other open strings, the G, the D, and the A, are important notes in the key of C major. So it's not surprising that when Bach, as he does in this piece, writes sometimes on all four strings simultaneously, the sonority of this is enormous. It almost sounds like a string quartet rather than a single cello. If you ever have an opportunity to hear this played by a cellist, I hope you'll take advantage of it. Here is the Sarabande in C major from the third suite of Bach. Thank you. The next song is by, music is by Jules Stein, and the words are by Sami Khan. Sami Khan was sitting in a heat wave in Los Angeles when he got a call from Stein, and the call said that Frank Sinatra had called and he wanted a Christmas song. Well, Khan was not very excited about that because Irving Berlin's White Christmas had just come out, and that was one of the greatest Christmas songs ever. They didn't feel they could compete with that. But you don't really say no to Frank Sinatra. And so they set out to work on it. Khan asked Stein whether there had ever been a Christmas waltz. And because they couldn't think of one, they resurrected an old waltz that Stein had written before and provided it with words. And Frank Sinatra liked it. It became the B-side of his recording of White Christmas, and since then become enormously popular with everybody. But years later, Khan wrote in his memoirs that there was something that troubled him about the words that he had written. These are the words that he had in mind. He says, "It's that time of year when the world falls in love. Every song you hear seems to say, 'Merry Christmas, may your New Year's dreams come true.' And this song of mine in three-quarter time wishes you and yours the same thing too." Well, what Khan was troubled by and fretting over was, he said, you'll notice that there's an impure rhyme in that lyric. Mine and time. I wonder what Khan would have thought of our modern rap singers and our modern popular singers in general. Anyway, a beautiful song. One more nice arrangement by Brent Edstrom of the Christmas Waltz by Khan and Stein. Thank you. Now, here is the promised pair of dances. These are two bourrées, two French dances. Matheson says about the bourrée that its distinguishing feature resides in contentment and a pleasant demeanor. At the same time, it is somewhat carefree and relaxed, a little indolent and easygoing, though not disagreeable. In Bach's usual way, he writes a bourrée in C major, and then he follows that by a bourrée in C minor, and then he repeats the first bourrée. So C major, C minor, C major. These are the bourrées from the French Suite number 3, the cello Suite number 3 by Bach. Final popular song. This is also associated with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. It comes from the musical Follow the Fleet. It's by Irving Berlin, and the song is let's face the music and dance. Like the bourrées we've just heard, it happens to alternate between the keys of C major and C minor. So here is, let's face the music and dance. Thank you. I'd like to thank Keith Chase for his hours of spent in preparation and the time spent recording and then processing the recordings. I want to thank Blanca Diaz and the rest of the staff for making these recordings available on YouTube and also on our local television channel. I want to thank all of you for coming along on this adventure, playing Bach and popular music in this combination. So now I will play the final movement of the third cello suite of Bach. It's a jig. The jig comes from an English dance, the jig, which was adopted in France got a little bit of French culture, a little bit of polish, but never became an actual court dance. So here is the gigue. It has a touch of the exotic in it, in this one, Bach does, and perhaps a little bit Spanish, or maybe what Mozart later called Turkish music in it. Here is the gigue, the final movement of the Suite Number 3 in C major of Bach for cello.